Hello and welcome to Fulfilled Dynamics. I'm Larry Siegel. Glad you've joined us today for the program. We are Fulfillment with Meaning. And today we are going to be talking a little bit about some things that are going to be interesting. You're going to love this. But let me tell you about Fulfilled Dynamics. Fulfilled Dynamics takes all of the parts of the one integrated whole from the perspective of fulfillment and demonstrates the power or dynamic of the meaning of the Bible to transform the lives of people living today. Now, in this program today, we are going to talk about the structure of biblical fulfillment. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, great, he's going to talk about time statements. Well, actually, that's not really the case. We're not even going to mention the time statements, although they're part of the truth and part of what the Bible teaches. We're going to actually look at some other things. We're going to be looking at redemptive history and the balance of redemptive history. We're going to talk about Adam and the natural redemptive history carried all the way through to the time of Christ, how the natural became the spiritual. We're going to talk about the law, the sin, the death, Israel, the old covenant, condemnation, and on the spiritual side, justification, the sanctification, the glorification, Israel, the new covenant, and righteousness. All of those things are part of it. Well, what is the structure of fulfillment? Well, we want to understand God's purpose of the ages, Ephesians 3:11. Now, one of the things that we have to realize, and maybe we don't think about this all that often, but we do realize that the Bible is like every other book. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end, just like every book. And so, as we talk about this, we're going to look at things from this perspective in terms of expectation. The first 39 books of the Bible, commonly referred to as the Old Testament, are the time of promise and prophecy that was revealed to the patriarchs and to the prophets. And then we're going to look at the last 27 books of the Bible as being the time of fulfillment and the realization of what was promised and prophesied in those first 39 books. And so we're going to be talking specifically in this series on the structure of fulfillment. We're going to talk about words that are used but not really defined. Sometimes we use biblical words, but we never define what we really mean. And there are really six words we're going to be talking about, and we want to keep in consideration. They're not in any area of importance in the way that they're listed on this particular chart, but we're going to define them. And you may not agree with these definitions, but as we go along in this series, we'll talk about how these are biblical definitions found in the text. What is an age? Well, an age is a duration or length of time in relationship to the administration of God through covenant. And so it's a time that takes place within the realm of covenant. We'll talk about what covenant is. Covenant is that which defines the boundaries of relationship of those who are living under the authority and administration of God. And so covenant defines relationship, and the age defines the length of time that's delineated within that covenant. Heavens and earth. Well, that's a Hebrew idiomatic expression. It's found in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And even though we look at that and we say, well, that's talking about the sky and the land and all those things related to planet Earth, what we have to realize is that in an idiomatic sense, the expression carries with it the idea of the realm of rule, dominion, authority, and administration of God, once again as determined by covenant. And so heavens and earth, covenant, and age are all related to each other in that sense. Well, the Bible also talks about land. And we hear about land promises. We hear about those things. You read in Genesis, it says, let dry land appear, and so on. Land is the realm, location, or dwelling place where the administration of God, as determined by covenant, is exercised. For example, the Garden of Eden was that land that God had prepared for Adam and Eve as the place where they would live and reside. And once again, it's all in the context of covenant. Well, what does the Bible mean when it talks about a world? Well, a world is an orderly arrangement, a social order or system. It calls attention to the nation or people inside the covenant system over whom the administration of God's rule, domain, and authority extend. And so often when the Bible talks about the world, it's talking about a more limited idea than the entire planet. We'll get into some of that as we go. What about law? What does law have to do with anything? Now think about this. The law was the orderly system through which the terms and conditions of the covenant operates and through which the rule, domain, and authority and administration of God are delineated. In other words, you have covenant that defines the relationship, and within that you have law that dictates and determines how that relationship is understood and exercised. And so these are terms just quickly going through these definitions, and you may or may not agree with them at this point. But I promise that as we go along and we look at the Bible and some things, we'll see how all these things fit together in a very orderly, true, and distinct way. Well, redemptive history. It really is the history of two men. It's the history of Adam and Christ and the process through which, moving forward through redemptive history. Now, we're not talking about human history. We're talking about redemptive history, and that's defined in the scriptures. We're going to talk about the law, the sin, and the death that took place as a result of the events in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve disobeying God and the consequences and results of that. We'll talk about God's promises made to Abraham and how the seed promise that had been given to Adam and Eve at the time that they were expelled from the Garden of Eden was carried forward to the time of Abraham. And we're going to talk about Israel according to the flesh, that is, the natural descendants of Abraham, and how that promise was carried forward. But we're also going to talk about Israel according to the Spirit. See, the Abrahamic promise had both a natural and a spiritual aspect to it. And we have to see both of those things and how they work together. And then we'll talk about the last days and the remnant that was being gathered out and how the Gentiles were being brought together along with the remnant of Israel into the one body. And we're going to talk about justification, sanctification, and glorification as that which was determined as the realization and the solution to those things as determined by law. Well, you needed justification. When it came to the sin, you needed sanctification or cleansing or to be made holy. When it talks about the death, it's talking about the fact that the solution for the death is resurrection and glorification. Now, as we interpret the Bible and look at the things that pertain to Scripture, what we're going to be able to see is that in order to understand the biblical context, we realize that there are, number one, there are facts that are found in the text. That's all the verses that deal with a particular subject and delineate and define what that is. And then there is the time in which the things that are being described and talked about in the text take place. And then there is the manner. What are the circumstances? How is that being worked out? And what was the purpose? So we have fact, time, manner, and purpose all found within the biblical context. And you know what? It doesn't matter what doctrine or what teaching we're talking about, whether it's talking about the things that took place in the beginning or if we're talking about eschatology and the things that pertain to the end. There's the fact, time, manner, and purpose. And if you look at those as constituent elements, what you find is that when you lay out the case and you present the fact, the time, the manner, and the purpose of these things, you've proved the proposition to be true. Now, As we were talking about redemptive history, we realized that associated with Adam was a heavens and earth, and associated with Christ are a heavens and earth. Adam represented the natural. Within that came the Abrahamic promise. With that developed the old covenant that was given to Israel. That was all part of the natural. But you know, the law of the sin and the death continued. And even though there was land, there was a temple, there was priesthood, there were sacrifices and works, it took Jesus coming into the world, the Word made flesh, dwelt among us. It took him coming into the world and dealing with those things for it to all come out in a beautiful way. And so you find that through the cross, guess what? There's another land. There's a new temple. There's another priesthood. There's the blood of Christ that was shed to bring about forgiveness of sins. And then we talk about justification, sanctification, glorification. All of these things were leading up to the end of the age. And as I said earlier, we delineated and defined the concept of age, but we'll have to talk about that more as we go along. When we get to the last days, we're going to have to look and see what it's talking about relative to the end that was mentioned. And we're going to talk about the transformation, the age to come. We're going to talk about new heavens and a new earth. We're going to talk about the creation. We're going to talk about a new Jerusalem. We're going to talk about the restored dominion and the victorious life that comes as a result of it. And so ultimately, what we have today as people is the fullness of God and the promise that God has made. We live within the fullness of all that God has promised. And so when we look at these things and as we understand them, it's going to transform our lives. It's going to bring peace into our lives. It's going to give us a sense to move forward with and in looking for things to get better in our relationship with God. Now, I appreciate you visiting our program today, Fulfilled Dynamics, Fulfillment with Meaning. And you can visit our website. It's fulfilleddynamics.com. You can write to me, larry.siegel@icloud.com. If you write to me with questions or comments, I'll make sure that I get back to you on that. Anyway, we appreciate you joining us here on Fulfilled Dynamics. Until next time, I'm Larry Siegel.